Hey guys, I'm here today to tell you a little bit about the next step in your process for your research papers, which is to do some research and document it in the form of an annotated bibliography. Now you might remember that you did an annotated bibliography first semester when we were doing our research paper. An annotated bibliography is where you find sources for a project and then you write a little bit about them, and then you can share that with your sponsor who can help you make sure you're on the right track. Okay, so here's the annotated bibliography assignment sheet. And so basically what you're going to be doing is you read a story, you discussed the story with your group, you developed your own initial interpretation, and now you're going to do some research about the story. And by doing that research, you will be able to broaden your interpretation, and that's what you're going to write about in your research paper, which is paper number 5. But baby steps, the next step is actually conducting the research. So for this annotated bibliography, you will have 3 sources documented. 2 of those sources will be credible academic sources about either the author or the literary period. And there's some help for you here. The author's names are all listed, obviously, and then there are a little bit of like search terms that you might use if you're interested in researching the time period. Some of that information will also become a little bit more available to you as you do author bio research. Sometimes they'll talk about sort of the time period in which they come from. The purpose of this is not to get you to sort of be limited in what you can talk about, but rather to help you find things that will help you better understand what's happening in the story. So for example, James Baldwin doesn't cleanly fit into any literary time period, but as you read about his life, things might come out, search terms might come out that would help you think a little bit more about what was important and influential in his writing of his story, Sonny's Blues. The third source is a scholarly peer-reviewed journal article about an issue related to the story. Now notice the difference between those 2 types of sources. A credible academic source and a scholarly peer-reviewed journal article are not always the same thing. You can have academic sources that are not scholarly peer-reviewed journal articles, excellent documentaries, specialized encyclopedias, things like that could be considered credible academic sources. If you're not sure if your source is credible, then talk to your professor and we can help you figure that out. A peer-reviewed journal article is a very special type of academic source, and those you'll use search term limiters in the databases to help you find those. And I'm going to show you that all in just a minute. Okay, one other thing I wanted to note on this assignment sheet, we have some suggestions about how to approach this. Also linked in to the annotated bibliography assignment sheet is a model of what that could look like. I created this model with this assignment in mind. And so what I'm going to do today is talk to you a little bit about the process that I went through to create this and maybe help troubleshoot with you and maybe help streamline your process. So first of all, notice this is an annotated bibliography. It's got the proper MLA header and heading and title, and then it's got the citation for this source, and then underneath it in paragraph form is 200 words of summary of what that source is about. The second source, we've got the MLA citation, and again, 200 words describing the source. Same thing for your third source, and those are in alphabetical order. Okay, so writing the annotated bibliography is not the hard part because that is just summary, and so it's actually pretty easy to write it. I think the hardest part of this process is finding your sources. That can be probably the most time-consuming part. Okay, so to find the sources that you're going to use, I'm looking for author bio, and for my example, I used The Story of an Hour, which is not something that you can write about, but I just use it as an example. So I was going to start with some author bio about Kate Chopin. And so I first went to the Google. And when I went to the Google, I started seeing what kinds of sources popped up. And I realized that this is probably not going to be the best approach. The very first thing that pops up is a Wikipedia entry. And while there's plenty of good information on Wikipedia, it is not considered a scholarly academic source because you don't know who produced that information. Anybody can get on there and edit it. And so it's automatically discounted as an academic source. Do not use Wikipedia as your sources. Then I looked at katechopin.org. And while it's a .org, which is possibly a good sign, I found that a lot of the information on here was really limited, not really that great for what I was looking for. And then I went to Britannica.com. Not a good source. A regular old generic encyclopedia like Encyclopedia Britannica does not count because it doesn't have enough depth of information to it. You can use a specialized encyclopedia, which I'll show you in just a minute, but just an Encyclopedia Britannica is not a good academic source. Then I went to AmericanLiterature.com and I thought, oh, that one might be good. And sure enough, there was some really great and interesting information on here. And I was like, okay, now I'm getting somewhere. Then I started to put it to the test that you have to put sources to when you decide if they're credible academic sources, and it started to fail me. So first of all, we have all these pop-up ads, which is not great. And then when I looked, there were not any like formal citations. I couldn't find any information about who produced this. They cite Pinterest. So I was like, even though this information is interesting, I don't think this is a credible academic source. So I scrapped the idea of using Google. And then I remembered back to Comp 1, how I had instructed you guys to try to use the databases as your primary source of information for academic sources. So that's what I did. First, I went to the ACC homepage, and then I clicked on students. Then I went to the library home site. And then I clicked on the A to Z list of databases. Now, almost always my go-to source is Academic Search Complete. But when I went there, I found that most of those sources were like scholarly peer-reviewed journal articles. And for my author bio, I don't need to put in all that work to read such really intense articles. So I decided to try another approach. What I did was I used this technique, try a list of databases grouped by subject. I clicked on that. And then I said, okay, interesting, literature and literary criticism. So here's a list of literature and literary criticism databases that are not necessarily scholarly peer-reviewed journal articles, but might have some good information. So let me see, let me check my works cited entry to see what database I used first. Actually, my first thing that I read about wasn't about naturalism, which is the literary movement that Kate Chopin is associated with. I actually started with her bio. So that's from Bloom's Literature. So that's the first one on the list. Examines great writers, important works, memorable characters, influential moments. And at this point, if you're not on an ACC campus, you would probably have to log in, but I've already done that. And then I typed in Kate Chopin. And here I found some biographies that I thought were really helpful information to inform my reading of the story of an hour. And if you're more interested in that, you can read my annotated bibliography. So that was pretty easy. Once I started that, I found it when I read the author bio that she was often associated with naturalism. And so my other source here is about American naturalism in short fiction. Let me show you the database I used for that. I used Gale Literature Resource Center. And then I typed in naturalism. And that was how I kind of got started. And I scrolled through, and I think, yep, the very first one that pops up. Oh, actually, that's not my source. My source was American Naturalism in Short Fiction. Naturalism. See, this is why those citations are so helpful in finding your sources when you're going to go back, because I typed in the title and there it is right there. So then I started reading about what naturalism is and thinking about how Kate Chopin's work is demonstrative of the traits typically associated with that movement. One thing I want to remind you, one thing that made it really easy to build my works cited page or my annotated bibliography citation was the magic citation button. So you can see here in MLA format, I just copied that and pasted it into my works cited page. Okay, so that was step one. I found author bio. I looked up some information about the literary period with which she's associated. You can also look at other historical events that are associated with either the time period or time in which the story is set. Anything that helps you better understand the story, the context, the setting of the story, or the author bio is acceptable for this. Right now, you're not developing an argument. You're really just trying to find out more about where does this story come from? Where does this information about this, where does this writer's life inform his or her work? Okay, the third part of the assignment was the most challenging for me. So for the third part, you have to find a scholarly peer-reviewed journal article about an issue related to the story. And so I was kind of at a loss. I was asking my professor friends, like, what would be a good real world issue related to the story of an hour? And I thought maybe something about being silenced as a woman in society, or maybe something about marriage. And none of that was really resonating with me. And I was looking through Academic Search Complete, and everything that I looked for, I really wasn't very happy with it. So I'll kind of walk you through the process that I went through for that. So I was in Academic Search Complete and I limited it to scholarly peer-reviewed journal articles, which you have to do regardless of what database you're in for your third source. And nothing was working for me. It really wasn't. It might work for you if you're, for example, if you're going to do research about a very particular event, like say Native American boarding schools, if you're reading Lullaby, and then I'm going to limit it to scholarly peer-reviewed journal articles using this little check button over here, then you might yield some pretty good results. This would be very informative. This would probably work just great. But for me, it wasn't working. I wasn't even really sure what I was looking for. So I decided to try the same approach that I used for my other two sources and try to do a search by subject. And I tried doing search by psychology. And then there wasn't really anything I was interested in terms of history. So I was like, oh man, I feel like I'm striking out. What do I do? I remembered back to Comp 1 where we used the opposing viewpoints in context database. So I went to the A to Z list and I clicked on O, and then I was like, okay, opposing viewpoints. And I was really just casting about for an idea. And I clicked on browse issues. And I was just scrolling. And then I saw this one, feminism. I was like, wow, that's actually still relevant to this story. Like a real world, this story is a feminist text. I wonder, if there's something there. When I clicked on that topic, again, this one has to, when you're researching real world issues, it has to be academic journals. So I clicked on academic journals and I limited it to peer-reviewed journals. Okay, and then I was scrolling through, reading these titles, and nothing was resonating with me. I was starting to get a little frustrated. And this was taking so much time and I have so many other things to do. And I was like, oh my goodness. But I kept at it. I kept reading those titles. And then I think I got to like maybe page 4 or 5 of the list. And I found the article that ended up working for me. Let's see if I can find it. And it ended up being really great. I found the article to be fascinating and relevant, and it gave me lots of good ideas about my, my topic. Well, I'm not finding it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my annotated bibliography and I'm going to look at what the title was. I can be whatever I want to be, alias and the post-feminist rhetoric of choice. So I'm going to see if that brings me to it. Not yet. Add another word of the title. Alias. Still not finding it. Let me limit it to full text documents. I'm going to actually copy and paste the title, copy it and paste it into the search bar and see if that will help me find it. Yep, there it is. Oh, annotated bibliographies, so great. All right, so I click on that and I read it. I read the abstract, which is the little short summary, and I was like, oh, this seems like it's going to be good. And then I read the article. Now you'll notice on my annotated bibliography, I cite paragraph numbers. That is because you can see here on this version of the article, the paragraph numbers are cited. If they're not cited, I would not put it on there, but they were cited. So I do cite that in my annotated bibliography. Okay, and so I read this article. It gave me a lot of good things to think about. And then on my annotated bibliography, I just wrote 200 words summarizing kind of what information I got from it. Okay, so that's pretty much all I need to tell you about related to how I did this process. Please do make sure you read the assignment sheet and take a look at my model bibliography and see if that helps. If you delay in this process, then it's likely that you're going to run out of time. The writing it up is super easy. The hard part is really finding your sources and making sure they're good ones. So make sure you leave yourself enough time to check with your professor if you're having trouble or if you're not sure if your source is appropriate. And hopefully you find this process to be interesting and enjoyable. And by finding out about the time period, finding out about the setting, finding out about the author bio will really help you delve into the story. You're not researching the story per se. You're researching where the story comes from. Okay, that's all I got. Go start your research and write on.